Okay. In the back of the room, voice loud enough? Good, all right. My name is Alexandra Scott. I'm gonna be your facilitator tonight. I am a community engagement coordinator working for the Oregon Water Resources Department. Tonight, we're here for an informational session for the Division 512 rulemaking. For those of you that are hearing that phrase maybe for the first time, those are the rules that govern groundwater allocation and use here in the Harney Basin specifically. So we're gonna start off with the informational portion of this. We're gonna take a break, and department staff are gonna gear up for the public hearing portion. So during the informational session, we'll ask you to hold your questions until the end. You guys can ask us questions, then we'll take that break, and then we'll ask you to give public comment on what you've heard if you are prepared. If you are not prepared tonight, that is perfectly okay. We have 2 additional public hearings taking place in August. The locations and information on that are in the frequently asked questions packet in the back of the room. As you walked in, you may have noticed there's a ton of information there for you. So we have our proposed rules. That's what we're looking for comment on from folks in the community. We've got boundaries map. We've got all kinds of stuff there. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask myself or our rules coordinator, Kelly, and we're happy to direct you on what those documents mean and where to find those after this meeting as well. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Kelly. Just as a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on the Water Resources webpage for the Division 512.
Hi, thank you, Alexandria. Those who don't know me, my name is Kelly Mines. I am the rules coordinator and policy guy for the Division 512 process. And to kick off the informational session, I'm going to just quickly do a brief introduction, have OWRD around the table, and then I'll throw it to Tim where he's going to start it off. So start with you.
I'm Simpson, I'm the assistant manager of groundwater, I'm based out of Pelton, Oregon. I'm Jason Street, I'm the East Region Manager for Water Resources, and I'm based out of Baker City. All right, so.
All right, yes, please, go ahead.
Yeah, you're at the next slide. So I've been battling with sinus infections, so, let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough, I'll try to ramp it up. Quick outline of what we're gonna be talking about. We're gonna first talk about why the rulemaking is needed. I'm gonna hand it over to Jason, let him talk a little bit about the strategy and the tools that we're trying to implement here with these rules. We're gonna get into classification, critical groundwater area, and then a serious water management problem area. And then after all that information, we're gonna break for a Q&A. So, if you've got questions as we go through this, jot them down, take notes, be prepared to ask it at that point. And then Kelly will talk us through what's next in this process and what you can expect as we go forward. So if we go to the next slide, let's start talking about why this rulemaking is needed. Back in about 2016, the department came out and did an update to these exact same rules. There were ongoing declines in the basin. We believe the basin will be over allocated. We're concerned about how groundwater levels were dropping. And so we, at that point, restricted the allocation of new water rights. Some of you may have been a part of that process or experienced it. we designated the Greater Hardy Valley groundwater area of concern. And we initiated a basin study with the USGS. So the Water Resources Department and the USGS collaborated for about 6 years on a basin study, studying the groundwater system throughout the Hardy Basin. And some key takeaways from that is that we determined that it's one groundwater reservoir. So this map here on the right shows the exterior boundaries of the Hardy Basin. And that's the Hardy Basin hydrologic boundary. And we found that groundwater is coincident with the surface water throughout this basin. And that groundwater is all connected. There are no known barriers to flow throughout the basin. Now, that being said, that groundwater does occur in different, what we call geologic units. So think rocks under the ground, different types of rocks. And groundwater is going to behave differently in different types of rocks. In more permeable rocks, groundwater moves more quickly. In less permeable rocks, groundwater moves much more slowly. And so throughout this basin, we have a wide variety of geologic units, and so groundwater behaves differently. But all throughout the basin, groundwater is connected. And then the last key point here is that the rates of recharge, so water coming into the groundwater system, and the rates of discharge, groundwater leaving the groundwater system, vary based on the location. And so whether it's pumping, spring flow, or stream flow, or groundwater dependent ecosystems, groundwater dependent plants that can actually tap into that groundwater system, the amount of discharge is going to vary across the basin, just like the recharge varies. So if you go to the next slide, I want to talk about the criteria that have been met, and these are statutory criteria that authorize the Water Resources Commission to designate a critical groundwater area. And there's essentially 3 criteria here that have been tripped. And the first 2 are related to groundwater levels. The first one is that groundwater levels have declined excessively. And that means there's over 50 feet of decline from highest known levels in wells within the basin. The second one is that groundwater levels are excessively declining. And that means that there are wells in this basin where groundwater levels are declining at greater than 3 feet per year for at least 10 years. And then the last criteria here that I've got listed is that the available groundwater supply is being or is about to be overdrawn. And overdrawn is defined as a situation in which groundwater pumping within a portion of the groundwater reservoir, that aquifer, exceeds recharge. And what that means is that all recharge coming into that portion of the aquifer is being pumped. And so that leaves essentially no groundwater to recharge to discharge naturally. And so what ends up happening in those situations is you start to see springs go dry, you start to see natural vegetation be impacted by that. And we see these, extreme declines as well. So overdrawn is a very serious situation in which the system is widely out of balance. And so I'm going to go into these just a little bit more. So if we go to the next slide, Kelly, let's talk about declined excessively. So we produced a report specifically for this process. You can find it on our website. It's open for public comment. Feel free to comment on that as well to the department if you'd like after reading it. And within that report, we define the wells that we know have tripped this condition. So here on this map, we've got Malheur Lake here to help orient you to it. We've got Burns and Hines up here, and we've got these red dots are wells that have met this condition, so greater than 50 feet of decline. There are some of these wells that have gone beyond 100 feet of decline. And so we have this condition. Now, that list of wells is not comprehensive of all wells in this area that might have crossed this condition. We're limited by the data we have. In order to evaluate decline excessively, we have to have a historic water level measurement and a current water level measurement. And for many wells, we either don't have the historic or we don't have the current. And so we believe that more wells would be listed on this map if we had a complete data set for all wells in the basin. And then the other thing I want to call out is that we expect more wells to cross this threshold in the next several years based on the rates of decline. And so just because we have couple of dots up here doesn't mean there aren't more wells in that area that would have also experienced that same condition. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about excessively declining. So again, this is the rate test. It's 3 feet per year for at least 10 years of decline. And again, we've got similar map, set of wells. And again, in order to have an evaluation of this criteria, we have to have current water level measurements. So we have to have at least 10 years of data so that we can compare over the 10 years how much groundwater levels are declining. And again, we expect that there would be more wells on this map if we had a more complete data set. And we expect that more wells would cross this threshold in the next several years. So we have a pretty serious problem with declines here. And now if we go to the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about overdraw. So the USGS groundwater study divided the basin into 3 key areas: the north, the west, and the south. And they did this for the purposes of calculating a water budget. And that's really the 3, we'll call them primary river systems. So you've got the Silvies, the Silver Creek, and then the Donner Blitzen. And those are the 3 colored areas on this map. And within that, they were able to calculate essentially the amount of recharge coming in. And then they divided the basin into uplands and lowlands. Recharge primarily happens in the upland, discharges down to the lowlands as surface water, and then re-infiltrates as recharge in the lowlands. And so the yellow boundary here on this map is what's considered the lowlands within the study. And so on the left-hand side, I've got a table here that shows by water budget region the difference between lowland recharge, so the amount of water coming into the lowland, and pumpage. And then in the second column, I've got a difference of the lowland recharge and authorized use. So how much paper water right is out there. And so if we look at just how much recharge and pumpage compare within the northern region, this green section, pumping exceeds recharge by about 2,700 acre feet per year. And so we're clearly overdrawn by the definition in this scenario. The southern region is in much better shape. Recharge exceeds pumpage by about 26,400 acre feet. But then that western region, we see pumpage or recharge exceeds pumpage by only about 4,500 acre feet. And so if you then look at the next column there, we've got the authorized amount. So in that northern region, if all of the paper water were to be pumped, we would be overdrawn by about 96,000 acre feet. That's how wildly out of balance we are here from an over allocation standpoint. And in that western region, we're about 18,000 acre feet above the recharge. And so we believe that western water budget region to be considered for the purposes of this about to be overdrawn, because all it takes is a bit more pumping in that region and we cross the threshold for clearly overdrawn. And so that outlines what we believe to be the key problem. And now I'm going to let Jason talk about our strategy for trying to solve this problem.
So there are a few things that the department could do to try to address this issue, and so we'll talk about some of those things. So the tools that we have to address this issue are here on the table. So one of them is, and we'll get deeper into these, but the classification tool, which basically allows the department to determine what uses are allowed in the basin and what the quantity of water is that can be used under those uses. And then what this does, it helps us protect recharge. It kind of slows things down a little bit so that we're not making the problem worse for the future. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the critical groundwater area. Tim would dive a little bit deeper into that, and that's the larger tool that we use that allows us to actually control what's currently happening and reduce existing use to prevent that decline. And so that will, help us stabilize the water use, stabilize groundwater levels in the basin. And then we have the last one here we'll talk about is the serious water management problem area, or SWAMPA, which means that, that requires data gathering basically. So it requires users to, put on a measuring device, report their use annually. And that way, you know, we have more data to determine what it's gonna take to get to our goal of a more stable level. But there are also other voluntary tools that can be used. There are options for folks to do voluntary agreements that, you know, allows folks to come together, take the amount of water they're collectively entitled to, and distribute it amongst themselves as they see fit. There is that option, and then there's also currently a Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, the CRET program that is going on in the basin, which encourages, well, it allows people to cancel their water right. In exchange for that, they get a payment from the government up to 15 years, and that's, you know, depending on the rental rate on the federal side, that can be a, you know, an option personally. So we'll talk a little bit about that classification option. So this is the classification boundary, and the boundary, you know, goes up here, up by Seneca, takes in part of Grant County over here, and then it's, the rest of it is within Harney County. It goes down through the lakes here and down south. So that's the entire boundary of the classification area. Next slide, please. So the classification, as I was saying earlier, so new water uses within the basin are gonna be limited. Supposed to be limited to only exempt uses, so uses like house well or stock well, it's exempt, it doesn't need a water right. So those would still be allowed. And then non-consumptive geothermal uses like heating a house, that kind of thing, and injecting it back into the ground, that's allowed without any sort of additional rate. So that means new rights being issued for anything that's consumptive, like an irrigation right, or even, you know, an industrial right, would be limited and not likely issued under the classification. But it does not impact the transfer of water rights. So if you wanted to transfer a water right from either one use to a different use, or one place of use, or one field, for example, on an irrigation right to another field, you're still allowed to do that. Classification. And so that covers classification. I'm going to turn it back over to Tim again to talk about critical groundwater.
Thanks, Jason. So as we talk through this, I hope all of you grabbed the rule packet there in the back. It's the proposed rules, and then we've got the exhibits as well. So you can see all the maps and have them up close in front of you. And I'll try to reference as we go through this, the different portions of the rules that we're talking about. So when it comes to critical groundwater area, I want to make it really clear that what we're proposing in these rules is the process by which we will reduce use to try to stabilize groundwater levels. At no point in the rules do we call out what the cut date will be for water rights to be curtailed to. We're unable to calculate that until after the rules have been adopted by the commission, and the process by which we would figure that out has been approved. And so I can't tell you today what the cut date is going to be for water rights. But what we can talk about is the process by which we're going to figure that out and set up a plan for stabilizing groundwater levels in the basin. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So in the rules, the first page is primarily definitions. And then we get into administrative boundaries and then classifications. And then in Rule 41, we get to the actual critical groundwater area proposed rules. And so that's where I'm going to start out here is with that specifically. So if we jump to the next slide, Kelly, in the rules here, we lay out a goal for groundwater levels within the basin, and that is we're trying to stabilize groundwater levels in the next 30 years. And in the rules, we're using a term called the target water level trend. And basically what that target water level trend means is that we want the water levels to show zero decline over a 6-year period within each sub-area. So water levels will be evaluated within each sub-area independently of each other. And if water levels are stable, zero decline over that 6-year period as calculated, then we've achieved our goal. And so the goal is to get there within 30 years. We go to the next slide. In this same rule section 41, we talk about regular review of these rules. So by statute, we're required to review these rules. And we have to do a 3-year review of the rules because they're proposed to restrict groundwater usage. And then we have to do a 10-year review in order to review conditions to see if the critical groundwater area is still needed. And so with each of those reviews, what we're proposing is that we would present that review at a public meeting here in the basin. And we would accept public comment on it, both in written and oral form. And then the department would summarize those comments and we'd present them along with the review at a Water Resources Commission meeting that's been properly noticed and that has an opportunity for public comment. So as a citizen of the basin, you could attend the meeting here in the basin, provide public comment, and have that comment summarized. You could also then follow up and go to a commission meeting and provide comment directly to the commission on those reviews. And then the last thing that's called out here that I think is really important is that we divide the basin into 7 sub areas. So if we go to the next slide, exhibit 3 in that packet of maps is the proposed critical groundwater area boundary and the proposed 7 sub areas. We spent a little over 2 years working with the rulemaking advisory committee. And we talked through many of these boundaries and the department, our staff, primarily our hydrogeologists, our scientists, considered a number of different things in drawing these boundaries. We looked at groundwater levels and groundwater level trends, so which wells are tracking together. We looked at hydraulic gradient, so how groundwater is flowing through the system, where it's moving to. And then we also looked at a couple of other items, like I sort of refer to them as like socio-political, because what we heard from the RAC, that Rules Advisory Committee, is that more boundaries are likely to lead to more conflict. And so we had started with a 15 sub-area approach, many more sub-areas. And in order to try to reduce some of that conflict, we reduced the number of sub-areas to try to achieve the same goal. The other thing we looked at was complexity. And so obviously more boundaries means more complexity, more opportunity or more time you have to spend looking at a map to figure out, are you inside or outside one of these boundaries? And so these sub-areas are what allow us to target reductions to different areas differently. So we can treat the different areas from an administrative standpoint differently to try to solve this problem. And so if we go to the next slide, I want to start to get into the next step, which is really key. So we had to establish PTW, and PTW means permissible total withdrawal. And that is a statutory term that we're defining here in rule as the annual volume of groundwater that the department has determined will achieve our goal by 2058, which would be 30 years in the future from our start date, which we're proposing is 2028. And it will achieve that goal when following the schedule of reductions that we're proposing within these rules. So in a minute, we'll talk about the schedule for reductions. Basically, PTW is the amount of pumping we're going to try to reduce the basin to in order to achieve this goal. And that's what we believe is the right amount of pumping to achieve that goal. And we are presenting this in acre feet. It's presented by sub area, and it's established in Rule 50, so you can see what those actual numbers are proposed in the rules. In order to calculate this, and if we go to the next slide, we'll show the actual PTWs and the percent difference from 2018. But we used the USGS's model that was produced out of the basin study. It produced a groundwater flow model, and our staff spent many hours building software to interact with that model. And what we did was we attempted, use the model to identify the maximum amount of pumping on the reduction schedule that we're going to lay out for you in a minute, that would achieve the goal in the time frame allowed. And so what we believe is these are the numbers, the amount of pumping that can occur within these sub areas and achieve the goal. And here in this table, we've got the estimated 2018 pumpage, so that value comes from our groundwater study, and that's what was used in the model. As the most current data in the model. And then we've got our proposed PTW, so that's the amount that we believe will achieve the goal. And then we've got a percent difference here. So the difference between what we believe was pumped in 2018 as compared to where we're headed by 2058 with these rules. And so you can see what those percentage reductions are. Some sub areas are 9%. Weaver Springs is getting a 75% reduction. And that 75% reduction is different than the rest. And that's because Weaver Springs is by far the deepest cone of depression, the most groundwater level declines. And in working with the RAC, the department decided that it would be best for the basin as a whole if we curtailed Weaver Springs to bring up those groundwater levels, and that way there would be less pain experienced by other portions of the basin. It would also help prevent additional dry wells in that area, and it would have positive impacts for groundwater dependent ecosystems and spring discharge in that nearby spring complex down near Double Oak that feeds into the Malheur Wildlife Refuge. So the critical area of spring discharge in the basin. And so there's the numbers, and they're laid out here in that Rule 50. So if we go to the next slide, I want to talk about now how do we figure out what the cut line is? How do we get to what the reductions are going to be? Well, in order to do that, we have to have a starting point. So if we use paper water rights and only paper water rights, there's about 300,000 acre feet of water out there. And in 2018, we estimated that about 135,000 acre feet was actually pumped. So less than half of the paper water was pumped. And so what we're intending to do is to try to only allot water or give water to, in this process, people who have been beneficially using that water. Have they actually been irrigating it? Have they actually been using it for livestock or industrial or whatever the case may be, right? And that way we're not rewarding people who are essentially speculating on water and holding on to a paper water right without using it. The people who have actually invested in infrastructure and are actually farming should be the ones that get water. And we want to try to spread that water around as much as possible to keep as many people in business as possible and minimize those economic impacts that are going to come with reductions in water use. And so we call this process the initial allotment in the rules, and it's laid out here in Rule, boy, I skipped ahead on myself, Rule 60. And as I said, the allotment will be an order that basically reduces the amount of pumping down to the amount of water that has been historically beneficially used under that water right. And so if we jump to the next slide, I want to start talking about how we're going to do that initial allotment for the different types of rights. And we're going to start with irrigation rights because about a little over 90% of the use, like the actual beneficial use in the basin that's under water rights, is for irrigation here. And so in the rules, we're proposing essentially two things. First of all, we're intending to use a duty of 2.5 acre feet per acre for primary and supplemental groundwater rights. So on an irrigation right, you have a rate and a duty. The rate is how fast you can pump. The duty is the total volume you can pump. And so all but 5 water rights in the basin have a duty of 3 acre feet per acre. And we're proposing we're going to reduce everybody down to 2.5 acre feet per acre. And again, the reason for that is we want to incentivize conservation, and we want to try to get as much water to as many people as possible. And so by reducing water rights from 3 acre feet to 2.5 acre feet, we're trying to achieve that goal. The second thing is we're going to consider the historic beneficial use in the 5-year period from 2020 to 2024, when we're identifying the number of acres that are going to be allotted water. So when we're figuring out a volume of water to give to a water right. You take the number of acres times the duty, and that's the amount of water that can be pumped for that water right. And here in this figure, we've got your classic 160 acre place of use. So that's that square black boundary around the outside, that's a field. And then you've got 125 acres of, well, it looks like a center pivot there in the middle that's actually being irrigated. And so as we're proposing in our rules, what would happen here is rather than giving 160 times 2.5 for this water right, because these corners are brown and haven't been irrigated, we would take the 125 acres times that 2.5 acre feet, which comes out to 312.5 acre feet for this water right. So this is an example of how the department is proposing to implement that reduction in duty as well as to try to get to actual use. It doesn't make sense to us to give 160 acres worth of water to a field that's only getting watered at 125 acres. And so that additional 35 acres there is then available for another user, that's lower down the priority date scheme. So that's how we intend to treat irrigation rights in the rules. The next one I want to talk about is municipal and quasi-municipal. So these are, I think, your cities, of Burns and Hines are the primary municipalities here, in the basin. And so what we're proposing here is to allot 110% of the greatest single year quantity reported in the 5 years from 2020 to 2024. And so here on the right, I've got a bar chart that shows the reported usage from the city of Burns. 2020 was their highest reported year. They reported 1,250 acre feet of water use. And so we're proposing giving them that 1,250 acre feet plus 10%, so 1,375 acre feet of water. And then we have an adaptive management process that we'll get to in a minute, but we're going to reevaluate this water use every 6 years as part of our adaptive management process. And we're going to adjust the water use limit for the cities, these municipal and quasi-municipal systems, up or down to 110% of their greatest single year quantity of use in the 6 years preceding. So in the case of the city of Burns growing, if they were to use 1,375 acre feet of water in that 6 year period preceding that initial allotment, we would then give them another 10% of water. So this is essentially limiting them to a 10% growth in water use over the lifespan of this process, over that 30-year period. On the flip side, if they were to reduce their use through conservation and whatnot, then we could reduce their usage to 10% above whatever their highest single year's use was. And remember that all water that goes to municipality comes out of the permissible total withdrawal. And so if the city of Burns is growing and they're using more and they're allotted more water each time, that means generally an irrigation right that's lower down the priority date scheme would have to be regulated off in order to have that growth. On the flip side, if the city of Burns' water use is shrinking, you could end up in a situation where more water is available for irrigation, those other rights, and so we could see fewer irrigation rights curtailed off. There's only so much water to go around in the permissible total withdrawal, and how it's divided up is based on this initial allotment and then this process of adaptive management. And then the last essentially set of rights I want to talk about are the other uses. And those other uses, you can think industrial manufacturing, commercial, wildlife, pond maintenance or reservoir maintenance, things like that. And so we list out the considerations we're going to use when we evaluate those. They're not as clean and clear cut as, say, municipal or irrigation rights. And so we're going to look at the limits of the groundwater right. So how much are they allowed to pump total? We're going to try to look at their historic beneficial use in the period from 2020 to 2024. So we'll have to figure out a way of doing that for these different rights. We're going to look at whether or not water is physically capable of being pumped and being put to use. So do they actually have water use infrastructure? And then we're also authorizing other factors we deem appropriate for the use. And that basically gives us some broad flexibility to figure out ways of looking at these other rights and determining how to allot them water or not. And so that's the initial allotment. So now we've got it figured, so now the process, where we're at in the process is we basically understand like, what is actually being used out there? And now we've got to reduce that total use down to our PTW. So if we go to the next slide here, we're gonna talk about the schedule for reductions, and that's laid out in the Rule 70. And so that schedule is basically the initial allotment, so all those water rights added up together that we just went through that process, and we subtract the PTW from that, so the amount of pumping that can occur within each of those sub areas. And that's gonna give us the volume of water that needs to be reduced over the time frame that we have, over that scheduled period. And the rules specifically state that we're gonna curtail junior rights first. And that we're not gonna enforce these reductions until after the contested case process is complete. So there's two steps to this process. There's the rule process, and then there's a contested case process. And basically what that is, it's an administrative hearing before an administrative law judge, in which the department has to present the case for why we're curtailing groundwater use, what our plan is. And essentially, we provide each groundwater right holder in the basin a draft order, essentially what you can expect from a reduction standpoint, that you would then be able to go before that administrative law judge and contest the case that we've laid out. And so that's how we're gonna go about scheduling reductions. We go to those are the, I guess, the limits of what we're gonna do for scheduling reductions. If we go to the next slide, I believe I have laid out in a bar chart here that I'm gonna try to explain how we're scheduling those reductions. So for Weaver Springs, it's its own unique beast. We're curtailing it at 75%. We're intending to reduce Weaver Springs by 75% of its total reduction at the start in year 2028. And then the rest of the reductions would occur then in 2034, so 6 years later. For all other sub areas, we're proposing a 40, 30, 15, 10, 5 breakdown of reductions. And so here in this bar, we've got an initial allotment, and this is just purely illustrative. The values don't really matter other than for illustration. So you've got 0 through 50,000 acre feet. So if the initial allotment for the sub area is 50,000 acre feet, what we're proposing here is in 2028, that we would reduce that initial allotment by not by 40%. We would, of the total reduction that needs to happen, we would take 40% of that total reduction. So here's the total reduction that needs to happen over that full time, and we're gonna take 40% of that in 2028. And so now we've reduced use by 40%. We're then gonna wait 6 years and we're gonna monitor conditions and we're gonna see what happens. And we've got an adaptive management plan that we'll get to in a moment that lays out how we go about evaluating it. But for the purpose of the schedule, in 2034, we'll reduce 30% of the total reduction. So now we're at 70% of the total reduction will have been implemented in 2034. We'll wait 6 years. In 2040, we'll reduce by 15%, then 10%, and then 5% by year 2052, with the goal of achieving success in 2058. So over a 24-year period, we take the full reduction, and that's what's scheduled here. And so that's how we're proposing to get from that initial allotment down to the PTW over that 24-year period. And that's laid out there in the rules. And so that's how we schedule the reductions. So we figured out, first off, what's actually being used in the basin. We then figure out how much do we have to reduce, and then we lay it out in a schedule. And that's what would come out in that order that's going to come to each groundwater right holder, giving you an initial allotment and then a likely date for when your water would actually be shut off if you are subject to reduction. If you are the most senior water right, your water is coming out of this PTW. And other than that initial allotment, where we're reducing the duty to 2.5 acre feet and reducing you down to the actual irrigated acres, you would not be curtailed off as part of this process at any point. So We won't get to that cut date, this is how we get to that cut date. We'll know that cut date when we have the initial allotment and we have scheduled curtailment. And so this is, again, the process for how we get there. So now let's talk about adaptive management. On the next slide. So here, we're gonna try to evaluate our progress and adapt so that we don't over curtail. So we're using the best available science. We use the groundwater model to predict what groundwater levels will do. That groundwater model was built based on historic data from 1930 through 2018. Both estimated use, estimated recharge, actual measured water levels, measured spring and surface discharge where we had it. And all of that information went in and calibrated this model. And so we believe it to be as accurate as anything we have. But we're likely still off by some amount. And in that, we want to build a process by which we start making reductions, taking action now, and then evaluating our progress and making changes so that we don't over curtail, and so the groundwater levels stabilize in the time frame that we've laid out. So to kick off the whole process, we're proposing that groundwater reductions would begin in 2028. But between now and then, we want to evaluate groundwater levels in 2027 and identify if we still need those reductions. Because it's possible that through actions, voluntary actions within the basin, that we could see those groundwater level declines slow down or potentially halt. And if they do, we want to reward the users of the basin for that and not have to implement curtailment. And so if in 2027, we evaluate groundwater levels and they're at or above 2022 levels, and the target water level trend is zero decline, so we've evaluated that water level trend and there's no decline over that previous 6-year period, then we are going to delay our reductions that were scheduled for 2028, and we're going to delay them to 2034. So we won't reduce use for that sub area in 2028. Otherwise, we're going to adhere to our reduction schedules we just talked about. So that's the start. Another key thing in this adaptive management process is that we need to have data, and we need to have good data, and the department needs to maintain that. We maintain a quarterly observation well network of about 100 wells. So few of our staff, Dark Washman, Graham Thomas, Dally, and Cade, our local water masters, they go out in the basin on a quarterly basis and they measure water levels. And we use that to track trends. We also, many of the newer water rights, mostly those issued after the early 90s, have a condition that requires measurement of the static water level in the wells on that water right in March of each year, and then that has to be reported to the department. So we also look at that data in order to make decisions and to track trends and conditions. We are assuming that as junior water rights are shut off, that water right holders are no longer going to take those measurements and submit them to us. And so what we're specifically saying here is that the department may measure any point of appropriation, so a well on a water right, to ensure that data is available. So in the rules, we have a specific call out that says we can essentially come out and take a measurement on that well, with proper notice of the landowner. And that's to ensure that we have good data going forward, because our whole adaptive management scheme is based on tracking water levels year over year, starting in 2028 and going on through 2058. So it's critical we have that data, and that's called out specifically there. So in the adaptive management process, we've got the initial check-in, and then we're going to track and make sure we have data. We go to the next slide. Now I'm going to talk about checkpoints. So checkpoints are going to occur 1 year before the reductions are scheduled to go into effect. So 2034 is the first, I guess, second round of curtailment. The first round of curtailment is 2028, 2034. So we're going to do a checkpoint in 2033. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the median water level for each sub area and compare it to the model trajectory. And the trajectories are exhibit 14 in the map packet, and you can see those at the back. And basically, what the intent of that trajectory is it was modeled with the groundwater model. And it's basically based on our schedule of reductions, our prediction of what's going to happen with water level trends in each of those sub areas. And so it's essentially the trajectory that we are choosing or that we're accepting. How about that? These rules are accepting a trajectory for water level trends, and you can see those trajectories. That median water level in many of the sub areas is expected to continue declining for a period of time as it stabilizes. And so we're going to evaluate that median water level trend for each sub area, and we're going to compare it to the model trajectory. And what we're looking at is, are we on track or not? So if we're on track, we're not going to make any adjustments to the schedule for reductions, because it means our schedule of reductions is doing what it's supposed to in order to achieve a stable groundwater level in 2058. If water levels are higher than expected, then the rules call out explicitly what the thresholds are. But if they're higher than expected, we'll implement fewer reductions. So we could either reduce the amount of reductions by half or completely cancel reductions for that scheduled reduction if water levels are high enough. So if we're way off in our modeling and 40% reduction in that first year results in water levels being much higher than expected, then we could implement fewer reductions. If water levels are lower than expected, we can implement accelerated reductions. So instead of the scheduled amount, we can increase reductions by 50% or up to double, 100%. And again, we're comparing actual measured water levels with our expected trajectory to getting push success there. After we've done this evaluation, the department has done this, we're gonna come out into the basin. In the rules, we propose to announce the changes at a public meeting and then to accept public comment on those changes. And this is all laid out in that Rule 80. So I highly recommend reading through those specific thresholds there for adaptive management, as they're really important to understand. So that's how we evaluate progress over our 30-year period of management. Now let's talk about evaluating success. So in the rules, we say that no sooner than 2058. And the reason we say that is because it's possible that our reductions in use will have short-term recovery events. So what will happen is we reduce use and all of a sudden water levels bounce back up a little bit. Well, over a 6-year period, based on our modeling, what we've shown is that there'll be a bounce in water levels for a year, maybe two, but then they will again roll over and begin to decline again. And so we don't want to evaluate for success on the whole until 2058. We want to evaluate water level trends for 30 years in our adaptive management plan, and then look for success at 30 years, which is our goal. And so depending on the results of our evaluation, looking at that target water level trend, we see no decline. If we're unsuccessful and pumping is greater than the permissible total withdrawal, so we haven't implemented the full curtailment, and that could be because maybe in adaptive management period, we were way ahead on water levels, so water levels were much higher, and so we didn't implement all of the curtailment. Well, if we're not successful, so groundwater levels are still declining, and pumping is greater than PTW, then there's still more reductions that could be done. And so we call out that we're going to implement the remaining reductions as we see necessary in order to stabilize groundwater levels. If we're unsuccessful and pumping equals the PTW, so groundwater levels are still declining, but we've implemented all the reductions that we can implement legally, then we need to do rulemaking to adjust that permissible total withdrawal. So we need to go back through this process again, reevaluate, adjust the permissible total withdrawal, issue new orders, and essentially go through this entire process again to stabilize groundwater levels. And if we're successful and pumping is greater than the PTW, so we haven't implemented all the reductions, let's say only 80% of the reductions were necessary in order to stabilize groundwater levels. Then we can do rulemaking and adjust that PTW up to what the actual pumping is at that point. And so that would be essentially us saying, okay, we've achieved the goal. We don't need to implement these additional like curtailments. We can go ahead and remove those orders and adjust the PTW so that there's certainty within the basin that the department can't come back and implement those regulatory orders right then. And so that's how we evaluate for success. And I guess the last one that I didn't list is if we're successful and pumping equals the PTW, then we got this all right and we've stabilized groundwater levels and there's nothing more to do but continue to monitor. And that's in that's in 2058. So that's the critical area rules. I'm gonna turn it back over to Jason to talk through serious water management problem area, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. So.
I think so. Okay, as I mentioned earlier, one of the tools that we're gonna use is, we're planning to use is the serious water management problem area designation for the basin, so. Next slide, please. And as you look at this map, it'll look very familiar to the map we were talking about earlier with classification, and that is because it is the same boundary, it's the same. The RAC, what we heard from the RAC is we should try to be consistent with the boundaries as much as possible, so we just made this the same as the classification. Next slide, Kelly. So again, under the SWAMPA boundary or the SWAMPA designation, by March of 2028, every groundwater right holder in the basin that uses a well, obviously for groundwater, needs to install and maintain a totalizing flow meter for each well on that water right. So, so for every well that you have on your water right, require a totalizing flow meter installed on that to track water use. The flow meter has to be installed according to the manufacturer's specifications and maintained as long as you're using that water right. And it also needs to be accessible by the water master staff and the department so they can check and verify that it is indeed working properly. And then failure to install can result in shut off of the well until the meter is actually installed, and we get to the point where somebody just absolutely refuses. That can lead to civil penalties. That rarely ever happens, but it does happen. And also, as part of this, the department does or may have currently does have and may continue to have some cost share for those meters. So we have a pretty simple program to where folks can apply for a reimbursement of up to 75% of the cost of the meter plus installation. So what typically happens is the department can pay for the entire meter, the landowner can install it as part of their cost share, and then we get a working meter on the well. And so far we have a significant amount of money in that program. Other folks in the basin have taken advantage of that. We've spent, to my knowledge, over $60,000 so far, probably more than basin over the last year, installing flow meters on the wells. So the reporting requirement on the serious water management problem area, it's fairly simple. Each month, the landowner has to go out, read the meter, record that reading, and then report all of those readings annually to the department by the end of the year. So just just to track the use, make sure the meter is working properly, and also gives the department data to make sure that things are tracking the way they expect. Also gives the water master some data on the actual use, make sure folks are within their own right. And then if something happens to the flow meter, say for whatever reason it breaks, no longer functioning, those need to be reported within 48 hours in the discovery of that broken meter. So we're proposing that the water master needs to be notified, so we know that there's something wrong. And then we have about 60 days to continue using water to try to get that thing repaired and replaced. And so you have about 60 days following that to replace it before you'd be shut off and no longer allowed to use water under that water right or under that well. but even as the meter is broken over that time, still need to figure out some sort of measurement, and in the rule, it talks about, you know, potentially power meter readings can substitute for that time. And there are other couple of other methods spelled out in there, but typically power meter is the easiest. And then, once the meter is repaired, that needs to be reported to the water master as well, within 48 hours, to know that, there's no longer an issue. All right, I think that's the last slide before Q&A, so if folks have questions, we'd be happy to answer those we can.
No, yeah, no.
Sure.
Right. That was a lot of information. Yeah,
Like say for instance, the pivot that you showed, the 160 acres, et cetera, development of water. Why don't you show the chart showing what the effects of that are on our rancher, where they do yield, how much money are they using this whole production aspect? Because if it bankrupts our ranchers somehow, I'm a business, I'm not a rancher, so you know, but, I'm looking at dollars. You don't have any information that says how your plan affects our community. You reduce the cost of a ranch, it affects our taxes. Our tax base affects our school system, our hospital, our employees for the city of Burnsville Pines. You have no figures showing how your plan will affect our community. So I feel it's lacking a lot of information that I want to hear here today as to how it affects our people. They can tell you. I'm sure every one of these ranchers that are sitting here can tell you what it did to their bottom line when you do this. So I'm just wondering, as a business person, because
Yes.
So
yes, so as part of this process, we prepared a fiscal impact statement. And there's copies of it in the back that you can take a look at. We didn't present on that because we only have so much time today, and we wanted to focus specifically on what the rules are and what we're proposing. That fiscal impact statement goes through a lot of that. You can also online, we have posted all of our rulemaking advisory committee meetings. And there's at least RAC 14, which is our most recent rulemaking advisory committee. Was that day 2 or day 1?
That was day 1. May 15th, rack number 15, meeting 1, we discussed specifically the fiscal impact, the dollar amount of what our plan is going to do. And we looked at all aspects of the economy. So we looked at ecosystem services, so how is it going to impact life refuge? How it's going to impact ranching, agriculture, Kearney Electric, specific utilities, how is it going to impact local governments? In terms of tax base, tax dollars, that's all discussed. We have a document in the back talking about that.
I was just wondering, is the reason that you never notified either of the cities about your rulemaking meetings because you plan on stealing our water rights to make your whole thing work?
No, we notified the cities.
No, you didn't. When did you notify the cities? I'm a city manager for Burns, I didn't get any notification.
My understanding is we sent messages to the city of Burns and Hines.
No.
And no, we're not intending to steal anyone's water rights. We're proposing a plan for how we intend to reduce use in order to.
Our water.
We're not stealing any.
Are you going to pay us for it?
No, the rules don't lay out a plan for paying anyone for their water right.
Yeah.
The state, the Water Resource Department doesn't have the authority to take away somebody's water right that has legitimately been using it, and cities, you know, are have a special carve out for future water use in the rules too, so. You know, we don't, even if the department wanted to under the existing laws, they could not, take, cities
My
water.
point exactly.
Question about all of the, talked about now, is just reducing the water use. do we not have a plan on how maybe ingest the water back in the groundwater? There's other states that are doing, we're taking river water and filling up their aquifers when they have an excess like we have this year.
Yeah,
And I grew up here 80, 81, 82, 83, 45, 5 years. Our lake averaged up 12, 15 feet. I mean, it came up good 8 feet this year. So there's going to be a substantial amount of water. If we have 5 years in a row of snowpack, your springs is full of water. That's, I mean, it will, you're gonna have lots of water, you're gonna have lots of water this year.
absolutely.
Mountain has melted down.
So these rules do not prevent artificial recharge or aquifer storage and recovery.
But what I don't like is all we're talking about is trolling people when we should have a different plan for where you could utilize the water you have and ingest it back into it. I mean, that should be a plan. But why isn't it? Because that's an intelligent.
The Oregon Water Resources Department doesn't have the authority to take on those projects. We are the permitting agency for them.
Yes.
But we don't have the authority to go out and spend money on behalf of the state to do that. That's not something that we're authorized to do. And we as a state agency can only do what we are authorized to do.
But as a county, isn't there a way you could help us to do that?
Absolutely, we're more than happy to provide technical expertise to help with that kind of.
Water and put it back in the aquifer.
We absolutely have staff ready and able to help with those kinds of.
So that could be an option.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And it is already happening in Oregon. Artificial recharge. Triangle. is doing that.
Right, those.
Yeah, there's many locations across the state.
I was not aware of. I know in Nevada, it's.
Curious, when you said the, actual use is going to 2.5 acre feet per acre, primary. Oh, is this primary and supplemental?
Yes.
So supplemental will also get 2.5?
Yep.
Okay. Yep, oh, and my other question was dust control, if we have. How do we do that, for a solar installation or something?
Yeah, so, if, say you were to have a project like that. You'd either have to purchase water from a municipality. That can sell water for that purpose. Or you'd have to do some sort of a water right transfer in order to make water available for that purpose. If there isn't already a water right that through this process is allocated water for construction purposes. So.
So that's, and that has to be a regular transfer, since a free transfer, yeah, change for the use.
Right.
Regular transfer takes several years.
Yeah, so.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. The other option would be bringing it in from outside of the critical area, you know, maybe under a limited license somewhere. You can find an opportunity there, but that would, you know,
Trucking.
likely be expensive, but trucking it in, yeah.
But, I'm sorry, like domestic and stock wells make sense, so you could pump out those spaces and fill a water truck to do dust abatement, right?
No,
No.
not for the exempt use, because the dust abatement itself is
I
not.
got you, I see. Yep. I just had one other question, sorry, I was up. The rules, are they set? If we put in public comment, do we comment on the rules or chances to change rules? Or do we put in to the process and how you're gonna implement it?
Yeah, you could submit comments on the rules, we will evaluate those comments, and, you know, that could lead to a change in.
They could change some rules.
No, so what's posted and what we've provided is our proposed rule package that we submitted for public comment. And we'll be reviewing all public comment and making.
The adoption of the rules is.
Slated.
sometime?
Slated for December.
Yeah, December.
So, sorry,
I had the exact same question, if these rules are set in stone, or who's evaluating the public comment? Is it you guys as a team or is it a different entity that's gonna be reviewing this all? Is it lawmakers? Is it legislation? Is it?
So, yeah, so it's department staff, going all the way up to the director, and then we present to the commission. And we'll present a summary of comments as well to the commission. And then they're the ones that are the final decision maker on the rules.
So these rules can be changed. This isn't set in stone.
Nothing is set in stone until the commission adopts it. And even then, it's not set in stone. A rulemaking could be initiated to change them again.
Tim, could you describe what the commission is for people that?
Yeah, you wanna take a whack at that, or you want me to?
Well, I'll take a whack at it and then you correct all my misstatements. The commission is a group of 7, basically stakeholders from across the state. They represent different parts of the state. The commissioner for this part of the state is Woody Wolf. He's, out of Enterprise, Oregon, so Northeast Oregon. So these 7 commissioners across the state, they're just a board that directs the department, actions, approves rules, also they approve some more granting, things like that. So they're kind of the governing body for the Department of Water Resources. State.
So is there no local stakeholder from the Harney Basin?
For the, not from the Harney Basin on our commission at this time.
We did go through a rulemaking advisory committee process. There were over 30 people on our rulemaking advisory committee. And that was made up of stakeholders from within the basin and other interested parties.
Were there any from either city involved in that process?
We reached out and invited to, we talked to the city planner as well, but we invited to RAC and we did not hear back. So this was 2.5 years ago. This is a long time ago.
2 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the rulemaking advisory committee was formed before April
April
23rd,
Yes.
2023.
Yes, so department staff came out in March of 2023 for about a week, and we actually did a recruitment process for our Rules Advisory Committee, so we went around to different committees, councils with help from local partners. The Watershed Council is a big help in that, the Soil Water Conservation District. Trying to get the word out that we were looking for folks to be a part of that committee. Once that committee was formed, we did have, 15 RAC meetings that were advertised, and those were open for the public as well. And there was a public comment period at the end of each one of those meetings. So we really tried to provide a space throughout the process for people. And then there's this public comment process as well. So again, trying to reach back out to folks, recognizing not everybody had time to sit for 2 years and try to track. It's a lot of information to take in, and not everybody had that time to participate, but this is the time right now to engage with the information, understand what the rules mean to you, what you'd like to see changed, and show up for the public hearings so we can take that into consideration and make adjustments as appropriate.
Question, you had, indicated you're gonna be adding new wells to the monitoring going forward. How will those be introduced to the existing cohort without producing fines, because you won't have any historical data, except from the date that the well was drilled, which will not be much. So you're gonna have a very uneven basis to start.
Yeah, so I generally leave that up to the hydrogeologist, the scientists under my purview to tell me what the best way to go about that is. But just because we have a driller's measurement from a different time of the year, doesn't mean that we won't then try to collect a March measurement after that. And the goal will be to have as many wells as possible with a measurement in 2028. So that we can use those going forward for our adaptive management plan. And so if we don't have a water level for a well in 2028, in the rules, we specifically state that we can, using data from nearby wells, and other hydrogeologic data, we can essentially set a reference level for what we believe the most likely water level was for that well during that time period. And so that's in the rules here. I'd have to pull the reference for you. but we lay out how we'll go about that in the rules specifically, so.
You're talking about all these wells drying up and dropping drastically, like you said, 3 feet a year or whatever. Did you contact this either city on their, or municipality wells?
I don't know that off the top of my head, I'd have to talk with Dara. Do you ever work with Dara?
No.
Okay,
I've been city on Cold Birch Director Hines for 15 years.
yeah,
No one's ever got our number. You might get it off the website from the states. We gotta
sure,
send our.
yeah, so,
It's ours every year. We do all this for Saw Monitor, blah, blah, blah.
yep,
The city of Hines just finished their master water project. We have to do that every 20 years.
yep,
We finished ours like 3 years ago, the COVID hit and it was. Took forever, but anyway,
Yeah.
2 of our wells were completely redone. 3Ks, blah, 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 measured, and the one. Jones well was put in, if I remember, I was 61. Stacked low, I don't remember the exact numbers. When they redid it, cambered it, did all that, it dropped 7 feet since 61.
yeah, different portions of the basin show different,
Exactly, so
different quantities.
Why this municipalities, our wells are up there on the hill, we're not even close to none of this down here.
It's because all groundwater in the system is connected, yeah.
The further I go, the worse the water gets, quality. Wise.
Yeah, I think the frustrating part about all this is, I think, shared between boards, municipalities. Is that we essentially were notified a month ago that we were at our wells, were gonna be involved in this. 1 month ago. So that's why for all we're seeing us involved, if we were properly contacted, we would have been involved earlier in this process. So it's really frustrating with us saying, well, you have to monitor, here's your first public hearing, nothing was even talked about being involved in municipality wells. And you can say, oh, wells, municipality wells or what, we do have the water rights. And frankly, it feels like we're behind the 8 ball now, trying to get rules changed, if there was a chance for us to be involved in that process.
We've heard some similar comments from folks about, with concern about the city and our approach to that. And I mean, I would really highly encourage you to think about what we've proposed and give us, any kind of comments you have, because, we don't, obviously, we don't do everything perfectly. And so, if you have some comments about the 10% increase based on the last 6 years, that proposal, then please let us know. That's something we.
I call for comment is for this house being said.
Sure, so at 7 o'clock, we'll have the public hearing, and that's when we're taking that.
I think
Directly.
a better position to do with agriculture. So I real quickly wasn't gonna say. Right, I mean, all the consultations that we have already in last month.
Yeah.
That's every year.
Okay.
So, yeah, when the public hearing starts, we'll be
I
great.
still not find any of the documentation, any financial impact, anything, so. Overall, it's nothing. I suppose it's something on the website or something.
So I would say that the best thing to watch would be one of our RAC meetings, and we can send you a YouTube link for that. That will have the full presentation of that fiscal impact statement, as well as a presentation by the third party economist that we hired to provide an evaluation, and that'll have the very detailed numbers. So if you give us your contact info, we'll make sure you get that.
I just wanna offer myself up. My name is Harmony. I'm on contract with the High Desert Partnership. It's great to work with the Water Resources Department if you have questions, but I'm also here to help kind of step through and help you formulate effective public comments, both spoken and verbal. And I'm like I'm a non-agency person, and so sometimes that can be, nice to talk to a non-agency person, but I definitely recommend talking to the department. And I'm here to just help you step through it, help you figure out what your own thoughts are and record those so that you can transmit them to the department. So I've got cards too, and happy to just connect with you and have like an informal, just chill conversation about what's going on, what you think, and help you access all the information, because there is just a lot of information to go through.
I think the problem also is that this just isn't a ranch issue. And most people, when you talk water rights in our country, 99% of people automatically say, oh, it's ranch, or not my problem, farmer, not my problem. Then they don't realize how it wraps around into the values of property, or ranches, or people who've been in ranching for years and years and years, you know. And I'm worried about the business as well, you know, I touch every rancher in here being a piece of mechanic. You know, our shop takes care of all of these people. And I worry if they're not here, you know, and then it wraps around our schools, and our hospitals and taxes and all of these other variables that nobody even thinks about until it affects them. And so they say, well, we don't have the medical, we don't have this, or we don't have that, because of what? Well, they took our water rights. So now it rolls over into a different situation that we can't control it. So we don't control it now. Definitely won't be able to control it 30 years from now, 5 years from now, or even tomorrow. So it seems like it feels as though this is already set in stone, is how it feels. And I think people will take that personally, you know. That I did anything about this. When we're talking to cities that are saying, we would got involved, how we know. So, here we are.
But just to respond, I'm a water rate guy, so I raised for water rates, ag or whatever, other use. And we've been having these meetings for 10 years, they've been announced in the newspaper.
Of course, and that's my point, is that everyone thinks it's a rant. It's not a community issue, it's a religion issue.
So hasn't been announced as a rate this year.
No, that's what most people assume. When we agree, most people, I would agree that most people think it's just, I'm just a resident of Burns, why do I care about water rights? I just know I'm gossip. I need to go to a meeting, I don't think so. It's just ranching.
Okay, I'm looking, but the equation is for the city, we as people on this committee looked at, okay, we want to save the cities, so what's a way to make the equation that allows cities to continue to grow, to have more water? None of the other user communities and have that. Right, and you're just for city, and you're looking at city officials here at the that are saying the exact same thing. That we weren't properly notified someone's. No, like our wells are being affected. Right, I'm saying, okay, I'm gonna say probably what Kelly, every meter's gonna.
That's what they say, that nobody was aware that our wells were going to be affected. There was always talk about, local. Discussions that there's water issues, like you said, there is water issues, so but nothing inside the channel that was going to be corrected.
So we're going to, that's a great thought. And I'm thinking it is coming off more like something for public comment. We are actually gonna transition into public comment because we should be, I don't have my watch on, we should be right at about 7, Kelly.
That's 6:50.
Okay, great. So we're gonna take a 10-minute break. Maybe stand up, stretch your legs. If you want to give public comment, please stick around. And we will start that here promptly at 7.
Can I ask this question before the public comment? It's not,
Yes.
but during maybe one of the last RAC meetings, you guys had some figures for what the municipalities' needed water rights are versus what their usage is. And I think those numbers are important to keep in mind and why those figures of 110% of their highest usage in the last 6 years was chosen. It's unfortunate that we didn't have them at the table, so that seems like an arbitrary number, but they underutilize the deeded water right by so much that by doing that, it allowed so much less curtailment for the agriculturalists and the economic factors. So if you guys remember those things, that's helpful.
I did read that, he was like. It was significantly lower than what was on.
I don't have those exact numbers off the top of my head, but that sounds about right. It's about 20% of the actual water right, at least for the city of Burns.
Look at you.
Okay, we
And
may have,
I just wanted to say if I could, Alexander, I'm chairman of the watershed council. He's Kirby, your former watershed, he was very aware of what was going on and he was invited 2 years ago to the house. So I know you all feel like maybe you didn't get noticed, but you were reached out to 2 years ago. And then nobody responded. And then they never reached out again. They all were, it's been talked about a number of times and I'm sure lots of effort has been made. There's been lots of frustration over the last 10 years. The Watershed Council and the SWCD has been putting it out everywhere we could. And if people don't respond. We have.
Request for information that was actually safe.
Yeah. We have, I mean, it's been radio, it's been paper on the radio. Flyers put up around town, I've been at fair every single year. I banged my head against the brick wall as hard as I could.
Have you attended any city council meetings?
No, but. But it's not for lack of trying, so please don't feel like.
And I'm not trying to say anything you heard that people do, but I'm just saying that I served on city council prior to becoming the city administrator, and I had no idea what was going on. I have a busy life, so I don't read the newspaper and I don't like social media that much, so I mean. City council meetings are great to attend to get the information, not just to the city manager, but to our governing body that. You know, makes the decisions for the cities.
I just have one other question, sorry guys, about beneficial use. How are you guys actually monitoring the beneficial use part of things?
We have a couple different tools that we use for that. A lot of it is just on the ground.
Just walk out and look?
We'll want to verify, to make sure that we're not going to get to the level of, oh, you were using 2.4 acre feet versus the 2.6,
But you were talking about like a circle, so you can say this corner here is dry,
Yeah,
and so you're gonna just go out and just walk around the.
well, if we see something like that where, we're not sure about, we also use air photos, satellite photo. Even evapotranspiration to some extent, some of the satellite imagery. But if we have a situation where we're going to curtail somebody, or like their footprint is smaller, I'll want to send out water master staff to make sure that.
That's based on like 1 year look or
It'll be based on 2020 to 2024,
2020 to 20.
so a 5-year period.
Oh, okay,
So let's say in that pivot example, the corners were green in one of those years.
yeah,
Then it'd be the full 160 acres because it had been irrigated.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, and then just the other question, if a person has something in permit versus the person has something in certificate. And this guy's using it, this guy isn't, one of that certificate, he has used it, and permit is using it. Is there any kind of a change up there?
We're intending to treat permits and certificates exactly the same.
Okay, okay.
So
So
a permit is just simply a certificate that hasn't been approved yet,
Okay, okay.
for the purposes of this.
All right.
and this gentleman's been very patiently waiting, so.
Sorry, Mike. I'm trying to make it quick, but are your, posts up there balance?
Are they in concrete?
Pretty, I don't know, pretty close, but if you've got comments on them, we'd love to hear it at the public hearing.
Well, yeah, well, I don't think I've been wondering, is there a place you can go, when you make a decision, make your line boundaries, use certain wells and stuff, is there a place where maybe the well could use it? They're using it well, so that if you're gonna be using their, regional wells.
Absolutely, so we have an online map that you can go visit, and it has all the different layers of a lot of different data that we used in part of this, as part of this process
To make the.
to make the decisions. And so you can see the wells we used for water level trends. You can see the wells that we measured to draw sub-area boundaries, well, to draw water level contours that were used as part of the sub-area boundaries. You can see what our quarterly wells are that we measure regularly. So all that information is online, yeah.
And that boundaries map handout back there actually has a little QR code, so if you've got a cell phone and you hold it up with the camera, it'll scan it and bring that up for you, and you can do it on your phone. So you can do it on a computer, you can do it on a phone if you like doing that.
I have. Right. Line go right through the middle of my property. And I've got water rights and wells on each side of it. I don't know if that's make it or really make it. That gotta be decided before you. Think you plan really or propose my or.
Yeah, I think we have to look, yeah,
Yeah, we're gonna have to look at that closely, yeah. So, thanks for
All right.
calling.
We got one more question and no more,
No more, we have to
no
stop.
more questions.
We have to stop. We have 3
Yeah.
minutes.
So the,
What's like the punishment over that 110%? For municipalities in that year?
that's a great question, for municipality, I mean, I assume we would. This is something that, you know, would be new to me after 29 years in the department, if we had a municipality that we had to enforce, you know, on. And I assume we would do it like any other, regulation we would do in the same situation where anybody's using over what they're allocated. For what they're allotted, and that would be, we would, first, we just do a notification, just a general, hey, city, you know, you're over your use this year. And then if it keeps going beyond that, we would issue what's called notice of violation. Which is our official order saying you need to stop doing what you're doing. And then continues beyond that, then we have an assessment process which can assess a specific amount of fine for every day that you're out of compliance.
So my next question, probably be some exemptions for fire protection, right?
Fire protection is exempt. You can, if you, that doesn't mean you can store water necessarily for fire protection, but if you have an active fire and you have a source anywhere, you can dip out of that source to put the fire out. No question.
okay. We've gotta close out the Q&A and move to public hearing. Kelly, you're gonna give your spiel to the group here.